The wind whispered to the towering oak trees as the golden hues of sunset bathed the rolling hills. It should have been a perfect evening, one filled with the kind of peace that makes a person feel small in the vast beauty of nature. But instead, my heart pounded in my chest as a shrill, piercing voice shattered the tranquility. "What do you think you're doing?" The words were laced with outrage, echoing across the open field like a war cry. I turned, beer still in hand, to see a woman marching toward us with the force of a storm, her face twisted in indignation. My stomach tightened, and I exchanged a wary glance with my best friend, Nate, who muttered under his breath, "Oh, great. We've got a Karen. Love seeing entitled people get what they deserve." Subscribe for more crazy stories like this. We had spent months planning this trip, pooling our savings together to buy this pristine stretch of land, envisioning weekends of fishing, hiking, and escaping the noise of the world. The land had been on the market for years, untouched, and waiting for someone to claim it. And last week, that someone had been us. Now, standing in the fading sunlight with our tent freshly pitched and the fire crackling, it was finally real. But the woman charging toward us had other plans. "You can't just set up camp here," she snapped, coming to a stop just a few feet away, hands on her hips, shoulders squared like a soldier preparing for battle. She was maybe in her late 40s, with short, over-styled hair and an expression that spoke of years of getting her way. Her eyes flicked between our tent, the cooler, and my truck, filled with pure, unfiltered contempt. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ma'am, we actually own this land. We just bought it." I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone where the deed was saved, ready to show her proof. Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "That's a load of crap," she shot back. "I've lived here my whole life. I know the man who owns this land. He would never sell it to people like you." I felt my jaw tighten. People like us? My grip on my phone stiffened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I don't know what to tell you," I said evenly. "We closed on it last week. It's ours now." Karen's lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. "No, it's not," she declared, her voice rising. "My family has been hiking here for over 20 years. You don't get to just take that away." Nate let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "That's not how private property works, lady." She glared at him like he had just insulted her entire bloodline. "I don't care about your so-called deed. You're trespassing. I'm calling the sheriff." She whipped out her phone and began furiously typing, muttering something about punks ruining everything. Frustration boiled in my chest. We had dreamed about this land for so long, and here we were, not even a full day into enjoying it, already being accused of trespassing on our own property. I exhaled, trying to be patient. "You're welcome to call whoever you want, but the sheriff is just going to tell you the same thing. This land belongs to us now." Karen's face turned red. "You have no right to kick people out of their own hiking spot. We have history here. You think some piece of paper gives you more right than I have." I was done being polite. "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly what it means." For a moment, she just stood there, seething, her fingers clenched into tight fists. Then, with a huff, she spun on her heel and stormed off, but not before throwing a final venomous glare over her shoulder. "You're going to regret this." I didn't know how seriously to take that threat. At the time, I thought it was just a bitter woman throwing a tantrum over something she couldn't control. I had no idea just how far she would go. The rest of the evening went as planned. We grilled steaks, sat around the fire, and listened to the sounds of the stream bubbling nearby. It was supposed to be the first of many perfect nights on our new land. But the next morning, just as the sun was cresting the horizon, a loud knock on the camper door jolted me awake. Groggy, I stumbled to open it, only to find a uniformed sheriff standing there, arms crossed. "Morning," he said, his expression unreadable. "I need to have a word with you." A sinking feeling settled in my gut. "Let me guess," I sighed. "Karen called you?" The sheriff gave me a knowing look. Said there were trespassers on her land. I ran a hand over my face, trying to push away the sleep still clinging to me. It's not her land. I grabbed my phone off the counter and pulled up the deed again. We bought it. The sheriff took the phone, his eyes scanning the document. After a few moments, he gave a small nod. Yep, everything checks out. He handed the phone back and let out a long sigh. I figured this would happen. That woman's been a pain in my neck for years. I frowned. So she does this often? She thinks she owns half the town, he said dryly. But legally, you're in the right. I'll go talk to her. Just as he turned to leave, the unmistakable screech of Karen's voice carried across the field. What are you doing? Arrest them. They're criminals. The sheriff muttered something under his breath before straightening. Ma'am, we've been through this. They own the land. Karen's face contorted with rage. That's a lie, she screamed. I won't let them take what's mine. And that was when I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. The sheriff left after another 10 minutes of back and forth with Karen, making it crystal clear that we were well within our rights. I watched from the camper's window as she stood there, her fists clenched, face red, seething in silence before she finally turned on her heel and stomped off toward her house. I wanted to believe that was the end of it, that she had thrown her fit and would now sulk in whatever entitled world she lived in. But something about the way she had snarled that we would regret this still sat heavy in my chest. Nate clapped me on the shoulder, yawning as he stepped outside, stretching in the crisp morning air. Well, that was an interesting wake-up call, he muttered, grabbing a bottle of water from the cooler. Guess she didn't like hearing the truth. I exhaled, trying to shake off the tension. She'll get over it, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. She has to, right? But deep down, I already knew people like Karen didn't just get over things. They festered, obsessed, and schemed. By noon, we would try to get back into the peaceful trip we had planned. We went fishing in the stream, hiked a little farther into the woods, and even talked about where we'd eventually put up a cabin. The idea of turning this place into something more than just a weekend getaway was starting to take root. It was easy to imagine a small, cozy ranch out here. Maybe a few horses, a fire pit, a deck overlooking the hills. For the first time in days, I let myself feel excitement again, not just frustration. That feeling didn't last long. Around mid-afternoon, we heard the rumble of a car engine, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. Nate and I turned toward the road just in time to see Karen's SUV come to a screeching halt just outside our property line. The doors swung open, and this time, she wasn't alone. Two other women, both with the same sour expressions, climbed out behind her. They stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, looking like a trio of self-appointed town enforcers. I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered as they marched toward us. Karen was the first to speak, her voice even sharper than before. You need to pack up and leave, she snapped. You upset the entire community. This land isn't yours to do whatever you want with. The sheer absurdity of her statement almost made me laugh, but I held it in, keeping my tone steady. It is ours, I said, and we're not leaving. The woman to Karen's right, a brunette with a deep frown, scoffed. People are furious, she said, her eyes burning into mine. You bought this land without thinking about the people who have used it for decades. You're ruining something special. I tightened my jaw. If it was so special, why didn't any of you buy it? Karen's face twitched, and for a moment, she didn't have a response. Instead, she huffed and shook her head. You just don't get it, she said bitterly. But don't worry. You'll see soon enough. With that, they turned and stormed off. But I had a sick feeling that this was far from the last of them. That night, we tried to relax, but the encounter left an unease in the air. Every rustling branch or distant noise had me on edge, half expecting Karen and her little mob to return. And sure enough, the next morning, the harassment escalated. First, it was the sheriff again, apologetic but firm as he explained that he had to come back out because someone had filed a noise complaint against us. Really? I asked, trying to keep my irritation in check. We were literally just sitting by the fire. The sheriff sighed. I know, but I have to follow up on any complaints, even the bogus ones. He left without issue, but barely an hour later, we had another visitor. This time, animal control. A lanky guy with a clipboard informed us they had received a report that we had set up inhumane dog traps on our property. Nate nearly choked on his coffee, waving a hand toward the wide-open land behind us. Do you see any traps? The officer glanced around, clearly unimpressed by the accusation, and after a quick check, he left shaking his head. But Karen wasn't done. By midday, we saw a new car approaching. This time, a vehicle marked with the State Wildlife Department's logo. The ranger stepped out, looking equally skeptical as he adjusted his cap. Got a report of illegal hunting on this property, he said, looking over his notes. Claims of baited traps and unauthorized game processing. I let out a humorless laugh. Wow, she really pulled out all the stops. The ranger sighed. You got a neighbor with a grudge, huh? Something like that, I muttered. After a brief check, the ranger found nothing and left, but by then, my patience had worn thin. Karen wasn't just being annoying anymore. She was trying to drown us in red tape, waste our time, and harass us into leaving. By the fourth day, we were done playing nice. When Karen showed up again, this time with a few more so-called community members standing behind her, we didn't bother arguing. We didn't answer her threats. We didn't entertain her theatrics. Instead, when she started ranting about us illegally occupying her hiking trails, we just turned up the music, cracked open some beers, and kept talking over her like she wasn't even there. Nate made a dramatic toast. To our new land, he said loudly, grinning as he raised his bottle. And to us, the proud legal owners of it. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. This isn't over, she spat, stomping away, her followers trailing behind. But I had a feeling she wasn't just making empty threats. She had already tried law enforcement, community pressure, and outright harassment. What would she do next? That question was answered the next morning when the first delivery truck pulled up. The moment I stepped outside and saw the flatbed stacked with lumber, my heart skipped. This wasn't just a camping trip anymore. We weren't just holding our ground. We were about to make this land permanent. Karen wanted us gone? Well, too bad for her. Because we weren't just staying, we were building. The sound of the delivery truck's engine echoed across the land as it pulled onto the property, carrying the first load of lumber. I could already imagine Karen's reaction when she saw it, probably screeching from her front porch like a banshee. The thought almost made me laugh. Almost, because despite how amusing her tantrums had been, I knew this wasn't just about annoying her anymore. This was about making a statement, about proving that no matter how many complaints she filed, how many false accusations she threw at us, we weren't going anywhere. Nate was already stepping up onto the truck bed, grinning as he inspected the fresh-cut wood. Man, this is going to be great, he said, running a hand along the planks. Imagine sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, knowing this is ours. I nodded, the weight of what we were doing finally settling in. It had been a wild few days, but at the end of the chaos, this land was ours, and now we were going to build something lasting, something that Karen couldn't take away. I didn't have to wait long for her to show up. Less than an hour after the first few beams were laid out, her SUV came skidding onto the dirt road, kicking up dust as she slammed on the brakes. The door flew open, and there she was, nostrils flaring, eyes burning with fury as she stormed toward us. "What is this?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the quiet morning air. "You're building something? Here." I barely glanced up from where I was measuring out the foundation markers. "Yep," I said simply. "We're putting up a couple of cabins. Maybe more." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You can't do that," she finally choked out, waving a hand wildly at the construction supplies. "This is supposed to be protected land." I exchanged a look with Nate, who was clearly fighting back laughter. "Protected by who?" "You," I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Karen, this is private property. We can build whatever we want on it." Her face twisted with frustration. "This land was meant to be left alone," she snapped. "It's been a part of this community for years. You're ruining it." I let out a slow breath, already tired of the same tired argument. "No one else bought it, Karen," I reminded her. "No one cared enough to do what we did. You can't be mad that we had the vision to turn this place into something amazing." But she wasn't listening. She was too busy pulling out her phone again, probably dialing every number she could think of, desperate for someone to stop us. "You haven't heard the last of this," she hissed before storming back to her SUV. By the next day, it was clear she had made good on her promise to stir up trouble. A new official car rolled onto the property, this time from the county zoning office. A man in a stiff button-up stepped out, clipboard in hand, looking vaguely uncomfortable as he approached. "Got a report about unapproved construction going on here," he said, glancing toward the lumber piles. I exhaled through my nose, already exhausted by the endless parade of officials Karen had tried to sick on us. "We have the permits," I said, already pulling them up on my phone. The zoning officer took a look, nodded, and gave a small sigh. "Figured as much. She's been calling nonstop." He handed the phone back, rubbing his temple. "Look, as long as you're following code, you're good to go. Just be prepared. She's not going to stop anytime soon." That much was obvious. Over the next few days, Karen's desperation reached new heights. She tried blocking the road with her car, claiming it was a private driveway. She posted all over the town's community page, rallying people to boycott us, which made no sense considering we weren't running a business. And then, when none of that worked, she tried to play dirty. One morning, we found our worksite vandalized, supplies scattered, nails dumped into the dirt, and spray-painted words scrawled across one of the unfinished beams. "Leave." The sight of it sent a slow, simmering anger through my chest. It was one thing to complain, to whine, to call the cops and waste everyone's time. But this was crossing a line. Nate stood beside me, jaw clenched, knuckles white as he held onto a hammer. "We need cameras," he muttered. "We need proof." I nodded, already pulling out my phone to order some security equipment. If she wants to play games, fine. But we're not stopping. The next morning, the cameras were up, discreet but effective. And it didn't take long before they caught exactly what we expected. Just after midnight, headlights flickered in the distance. Then a figure crept onto the property, moving toward our construction site. Even in the grainy footage, I recognized the shape instantly. Karen. She had a bag in her hand. And as she moved closer, we saw exactly what she was doing. Dumping nails, throwing things around, trying to sabotage us. I couldn't help but let out a small, humorless laugh. "She's really lost it," I muttered. Nate leaned over my shoulder, shaking his head. "She's desperate." By the time morning came, we were ready. When Karen came stomping over, ready for another screaming match, we didn't say a word. We just pulled up the footage on my phone, played it in front of her, and watched as the color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For once, she had nothing to say. "So here's how this is going to go," I said, keeping my voice level. "You leave us alone, or we take this to the cops. Your choice." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her whole body trembling with rage. But she wasn't stupid. She knew we had her. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off, and for the first time since this all started, I finally felt a real sense of victory. The next few weeks were quiet. Construction went smoothly. The first cabin took shape, then the second. By the time we were finished, standing on the deck, looking out over the land we had fought so hard for, it all felt surreal. "We did it," Nate murmured, leaning against the railing. I exhaled, letting the satisfaction settle in my chest. Yeah, we did. The land was ours. The battle was over. And Karen, well, she had lost. The silence that followed Karen's retreat was almost too good to be true. After weeks of endless harassment, petty sabotage, and desperate attempts to drive us away, she had finally run out of moves. Or maybe she had finally realized that no matter what she did, we weren't going anywhere. Either way, the days stretched into weeks, and for the first time since we set foot on our land, we had peace. The cabins were finished, their warm wooden frames standing proudly against the backdrop of rolling hills and towering oak trees. We had cleared paths through the woods, set up fire pits, and even started sketching out plans for expanding the ranch into something even bigger. There was still work to be done, but for the first time, it felt like the land was truly ours. It was ours to shape, ours to build on, and most importantly, ours to enjoy without Karen's shadow looming over us. But deep down, I had a feeling she wasn't done just yet. People like her never accepted defeat gracefully. Sure enough, the moment she caught sight of the first completed cabin, she lost whatever shred of composure she had left. One afternoon, as Nate and I were sitting on the deck enjoying a well-earned beer, her SUV came screeching to a halt just beyond our property line. The door flew open, and she stepped out, looking wild, unhinged, her eyes darting between us and the finished structures like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. You built houses?" she shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her fury. "You turned my hiking land into some disgusting backwoods resort." I sighed, setting my beer down and standing up slowly. "Karen, for the last time, it's not your land," I said, my patience long gone. "It was never your land. You just didn't want to admit that someone else could claim it." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and for a moment, I thought she might actually charge at us. But then, just as quickly, her expression shifted into something smug, something triumphant. And that's when I knew she still had one last trick up her sleeve. "I hope you didn't waste too much money on this little project," she said, her tone suddenly sweet and dripping with fake sympathy. "Because I just put in an offer to buy the land back." My stomach twisted, but I kept my face blank. "That's impossible," I said. "We own it outright." She tilted her head, a condescending smirk tugging at her lips. "Yes, but I know people," she purred. "And those people can make your life very difficult. So why don't you just do yourselves a favor and sell it to me now before things get ugly?" I could feel Nate tensing beside me, but I put a hand on his shoulder, silently telling him to stay calm. Karen was bluffing. She had to be. There was no way she had the power to take this land from us. But that didn't mean she wouldn't try. Over the next week, she did everything in her power to make good on her threat. She filed complaints with the county, claiming we were violating zoning laws. She tried to get the environmental board involved, insisting we were destroying the natural beauty of the land. She even spread rumors around town, telling anyone who would listen that we were planning to turn the property into some kind of commercial nightmare. But no matter what she threw at us, nothing stuck. Every attempt to sabotage us fell apart under the weight of reality. We had done everything by the book. Our permits were in order. Our property was legally ours, and we had every right to be here. And the best part, the more she fought, the more she revealed just how unhinged she truly was. Eventually, even the town started turning against her. People who had once sympathized with her began to see her for what she really was, a bitter, entitled woman who couldn't stand losing. Then, one day, she simply stopped. No more complaints. No more harassment. No more empty threats. It was like she had finally realized that she had lost, well and truly lost. But just when I thought we had seen the last of her, she made one final, pathetic attempt to reclaim her so-called territory. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, I heard the sound of footsteps crunching through the brush. I stepped out onto the porch, my heart pounding, half expecting to see another official with some bogus complaint. But it wasn't an official. It was Karen. She stood just beyond the property line, staring at the cabins with a hollow look in her eyes. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there, her face pale, her shoulders slumped in defeat. And then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "It should have been mine." I exhaled, shaking my head. "You never wanted it," I said. "Not really. You just didn't want anyone else to have it." She swallowed hard, her gaze flickering between me and the land she had fought so hard to control. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away. We never saw her again. Weeks passed, then months. The cabins became homes. The land became something more than just a battleground. It became a place of peace, of possibility, of a future we had fought for and won. And every now and then, when the wind blew just right, I'd remember the way Karen had looked that night, standing at the edge of what could have been hers, realizing too late that she had lost something far greater than just a piece of land. She had lost a war, and in the end, we had won something far more valuable than property. We had won our freedom,